Okay, good. So I see that we have more introduction. Yashar in Toronto, innovation consultant. That's great. We have Luisa from Lisbon, uh, Colin from Glasgow, professor of entrepreneurship. That's pretty cool. Amsterdam, Brazil, really cool. Nice to see everyone. So many people from so many locations, so that's great. Good, so I think we can start. Can you please, in the chat, tell us if you're a startup founder, most of you, or whatever, so we just know a little bit about you. But generally, we're okay to start. So today we're going to talk a little bit about startup bootstrapping and what it means to bootstrap a startup. I think many of you are on this path. It's a very challenging path, by the way. Definitely an interesting one. I'm going to share my screen with you. So just a second. Let me see if I can find where did I have the presentation. In the meantime, I also want to encourage you um, I also want to encourage you to ask questions during the presentation. There is in the chat or in the QA button. Feel free to ask questions. And the idea is to have this a little bit interactive, if possible, for you to specifically ask questions about slides that you want. So from when I'm going to do a specific slide, I'm going to jump to you to see if you have any comments or anything that is basically interesting for you, and we'll take it from there. So just a second, let me share my screen and we can get started. Cool. For me, by the way, it's even better if you're going to use the QA button because that would allow me to see your questions more easily. So if you have any questions, feel free. Let me just do a slideshow and good. So my name is Eli David. I'm the CEO of StartupBlink. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do in StartupBlink before we jump to the presentation. Um, we also have, by the way, if you're interested in startup ecosystem development specifically, we also have a community on Slack that you can join by using this barcode. We're also going to send you a link to join to the community after the event via email. So it's just a place where we geek out a little bit about startup ecosystem topics and kind of enjoy doing that. So feel free. It's a fun community. And it's free, of course, to join. And yeah, generally the topics for today are going to be a little bit of an intro and an update about StartupBlink, and then a little bit talking a little bit about bootstrapping a startup. So a little bit about what StartupBlink is doing. We're building a global startup ecosystem app. If you go to startupblink.com, you would see more than 120,000 startups. Add your startup as well. We're always welcoming new startups to join. We're also doing a report that ranks the ecosystems of 1,000 cities, 100 countries. We're working together with more than 100 governments to rank and to develop startup ecosystems. Those are some of our clients, and we work all over the world to basically improve innovation. And for us, it's a great honor to also be in a situation that we are speaking with you guys, and the girls, you're entrepreneurs, you're building things. So it also helps us when we're doing consulting for ecosystems and what should be their strategic roadmap. It helps us a lot to figure out what is bothering you, what is interesting for you as well. So that's something that is really important for us. So great, yeah. Other than that, a little bit about today's about something that we launched. We recently launched something that is relevant for the people here, which is probably a report about the top 100 countries in terms of how friendly they are for making business for startups. It has a lot of parameters, pretty interesting, and this is a few examples of what you can see over here. Basically, uh, what are the countries that give you the most support? This is a teaser basically on the top 10, and you can see over here that. But I do have to say those are not the best places for startup ecosystems. They're just the places where governments are supporting the most. So you can see United States, Australia, United Kingdom, Singapore, Norway, Sweden. But I do have to tell you, once again, when you look at ecosystems like Norway or New Zealand, they're actually not performing so well. So although the government is supporting a lot, there is a little bit of a problem in the actual performance. So that's something that is a little bit interesting. Generally, the first slide that talks about the topic of bootstrapping your startup would be how to choose your ecosystem wisely. And this is something that is very, I think, very interesting in general to basically talk a little bit about that and kind of figure out a little bit about what is the location that makes sense. So the idea of here is that there are a few decisions in life that people say are the most important decisions. Uh, Naval Ravikant says there are three main questions that you want to answer. The first one would be who you are with. This, and by the way, it's not only a partner, but also it can be also your co-founder, who is going to be your co-founder, and so on. Who you're with. The second one would be what are you working on, which is very very critical. And the third one would be where you are. And I think a lot of us ignore the where you are part. So what StartupBlink is doing can be very, very valuable. If you go to StartupBlink, there is a full table for free of 1,000 cities that are ranked. And the idea is that both unicorns or successful bootstrap startups are surprisingly based in a batch of limited cities. There aren't that many cities where those guys and girls are going to be. And by choosing the right place, you're greatly increasing your chances of um, growing your startup. And for many people, it's a little bit illogical because sometimes we say, hey, but I live in a relatively lower cost location and so on, and I maybe even live with my family and I don't have to pay rent and so on and so on. But the opportunity cost of choosing a place that is an underperforming startup ecosystem is massive. You will never feel the pain. The idea is that a good ecosystem will give you random gifts. And that's the beauty of good ecosystems. I have to tell you, I spoke with a lot of people that have unicorns, and we're doing a lot of research about the topic. And when I asked them about the most important moments of their startup, they would usually quote random moments out of the blue that are, I met this person, and then this person connected me to this person that gave me the pivot idea or connected me with my first client, and so on and so on. In high quality startup ecosystems, those things are happening all the time. In low quality ecosystems, they usually don't happen almost at all. So the opportunity cost of making a wrong decision about where you should be based in is massive. It's very big. And we think that it should be taken into account heavily. Let's say when you make a decision about where about building your startup, together with that, you have to sort of make a decision about which city are you going to build your startup. Not everyone has to be in San Francisco. In some cases, it would even be a financial suicide to be in San Francisco, considering how expensive it is. But considering what is your vertical of choice, if you're interested to raise money or not, and so on and so on, you can have candidates that are even ranked 130 in the world, but they're much better off than candidates that are ranked 800 in the world, in a way. So that's something that is important to say. And I think not a lot of us are not a lot of us are taking this into account. That's something that should be noted. Now, a little bit about bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is basically the activity of bootstrapping yourself by the boot. And for the for the startups, it basically means self-funding without investment until reaching profitability. Needless to say, maybe this lecture would have been a little bit in 2021, sort of like a boomer lecture in a way. In 2023, this is much more relevant than the other paths. You probably know, reaching all valuations is basically slashed by about 70%. The number of deals that are currently happening are about 80% from the peak. It's incredibly difficult with those interest rates and economic foundations currently to reach investors and to raise investment. So now the tide has shifted towards bootstrapping a lot more. And you have to take it into account that if you are trying to raise investment, you're in a much, much worse position than 2021. And I would take much and multiply it by 10. So if you're thinking about bootstrapping, I'm not saying it's the only option. Sometimes we need uh, to um, to use investment money. There is no way around it, especially for building big things. But just know that your situation as someone that is looking for investment has greatly deteriorated in the last 12 months. And we have to be aware of it. Still, it doesn't mean that you can't do it or you shouldn't do it because sometimes you have to do it, but it was so much better to do it in 2021. So that's the unfortunate let's say truth about what's going on currently in the world. The beauty of bootstrapping is basically that. So how do you do bootstrapping? First of all, it's an initial investment and a massive investment of your time, a great amount of time that is unpaid. Now you don't have investors to pay your salary. And also in many, many cases, not in many cases, in almost all cases, it will require you to invest your money as well. How much? It's up to you. We're going to talk a little bit about this here, but there is no running away from investing money of your own. It can be $5,000, it can be $20,000, and sometimes it can be $100,000 and north to that. But it's almost it's impossible to start something on your own without investing money. Of course, more than anything, you're going to invest the time, and then you're trying to reach profitability as soon as possible by running to the market revenue, 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 while keeping expenses to the minimum. The bonus of whoever pulls it off and manage to bootstrap or self-fund is that you are on your own. All the equity is yours. You'll be surprised in startups that are raising money after a pre-seed round, angel funds, friends and family round, a Series A round, Series B round, and so on. You're pretty much as a founder left with about 7%. So there is a beauty, and of course, no ability to make decisions in your own company. So, but the big advantage is that you run and you create a massive company if you're successful, which is probably only doable if you have investors. But it's no longer going to be your company. Just FYI. So it's something that is worth talking about. I'm checking the QA, no questions, so that's great. If you have a question, please in the QA. It's better for me if I can. It's easier for me to look if anyone needs anything. Let's talk a little bit about investors versus self-funding. So the first idea is as following. Remember that I told you the investment scene has become much more difficult. It's true, but sometimes you must go for investors. But the idea is that what we recommend is that whatever you do, know what is your strategy. Like don't be maybe investors are good or not, because if you are going for investors, your entire strategy of your company is changing. And if you're doing the bootstrapping, then you go on a totally different path. Your time is spent in very different ways. So first of all, in order to say, can I actually bootstrap? Can I pull it off on my own? Those are a few things that you might want to think about. First of all, you need to ask yourself, am I trying to build a cash flow operation targeting a specific niche or something of a much larger scope? Larger scope means that you need investors. If you're focused on a super obvious niche that you're targeting and you know exactly what you want to give them, you can pull it off probably on your own. Another question is there a clear validated business model that make money? Now, if there is no model and what you're trying to do is the first in the world, it's very likely that you're going to go through a process of discovering what is the right model of finance for you, and you're going to have to change constantly. All those iterations cost a lot of money. So if you're the first in the world trying to do something or sell something that nobody else sells, that would be something for investors. If you already have a company, a competitor that is selling almost exactly the same thing, but you gave it your own twist, you're much more likely to make it from bootstrapping, because one of the biggest problems that we have as founders is product market fit. How do we make sure that we actually solve a real pain? And that's why most startups die. When you ask people why most startups die, they will tell you, oh, there were team problems and whatever. I'm telling you, the vast majority of startups die because there is no product market fit. Like you cannot sell. People don't want to buy what you've got. That's something that is interesting. Another question that you want to ask is there a clear pain you're solving? If there isn't a clear pain, you must educate the market. So, for example, Facebook, when they launched, there was not really a clear pain of um, of a social network. So they didn't know how they're going to monetize. They had to go for investors. Amazon, when they launched, also the same. They invested so much in what they do, they needed investors. So Facebook didn't have any business model. They needed investors. Google, when they started, didn't know how to monetize. They needed investors. But if you are solving a clear pain that people are paying for, then you might be able to pull it off on your own. Can you start selling something now? If the answer to this is yes, then you can actually probably do bootstrap model. If the answer to this is no, I have to develop something and it's going to take me a year before I even think about selling something, you're going to need investors almost 100%, or you're going to be a tragic case of a stealth startup that is working on something for years. But those are not the stories I mostly appreciate. So the idea is, if you can start selling something now, of course, it's not going to be the vision of what you want to sell in 5 years, but is there anything connected to what you do that you can start selling now? Maybe you can pull it off with bootstrapping. If there isn't, probably investors. And the last question is, do you have the skills to do most of the work yourself or with your co-founder? So I say you're trying to build something, it requires a lot of coding. Both you and your co-founder are no coders. You're going to have a very tough time to get investors, but you should get investment because it's going to cost you so much to hire those coders. If you need a mathematical algorithm or an AI expert to basically help you, and you don't have one in the team, get investors so you can actually pay one. So that's something that is pretty interesting. A little bit of the bottom line, and again, there are lots of questions here. You can write them down and maybe think to yourself, what am I trying to build and how much does it apply to this? That sometimes if you're not close enough to the market, investors are a must. But then again, it's a really sad period um, for that. So that's something to think about. Sashi is asking about any decision support tool I recommend. Unfortunately, in the startup, because no startups can replicate, there is no way of doing it. Naval Ravikant always says that if you ask someone that was successful, how did they do that? It's just like asking people for the lottery ticket, the numbers of the lottery ticket that won the lottery. It's no longer relevant. This thing has passed. So unfortunately, Sashi, there isn't. It's all about intuition. It's all about asking some uh, uh, first principle questions, like the questions that you see over here, and making the decisions to the best of your ability. Famous bootstrappers, all those companies managed to bootstrap. And MailChimp now did an exit of, I don't know how many billions. I think it was 20 or 30, I don't even know, something massive. They started as a bootstrap company. 37 Signals, TechCrunch, a lot of them are famous bootstraps. They have not gone for investment, and they raised money later on their own terms. The beauty, by the way, of being a bootstrap company is that instead of you going to investors and telling them, hey, I have a dream, I want to build XYZ, and can you help me with a little bit of money? You're going to be in a much better position if you build a great company that is bootstrap, and then they would come to you, tell you, hey, wow, I've seen MailChimp, it's an amazing platform. Can I invest? And then they invest in your terms, not on their terms in a way. And you don't waste money running after them. They run after you when they see that you have a great product. So that's interesting elements. And I also want to say that there are many more startups that have never raised any money. They conquer the niche and they generate great income for their owners. So you have a lot of startups now that are making about 70K a month of profit. Nobody even hears about them. There is only one founder, and that's a beautiful way to live without any pressure from investors and so on. So yes, you did not take over the world. You did not build a startup that is basically catering for the entire planet, but you found a beautiful niche and you have a beautiful profit and you have a lifestyle business that is generating a lot of money. Many people have managed to do that. So it's something that should be said. Let me see if there are any questions. That's great. Good. So bootstrapping is becoming more and more popular. The reasons are that launching a startup now is easier than ever. Before 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you had to pay for international calls and servers and whatever, and have physical servers in your own place. You basically could not have started a startup without an investment of about $500,000. You couldn't even get something to run. Now you have everything in your favor. Everything is existing. It's ready. You just pick it from the shelf and build your startup with that. So that's really important to say that it's we're living in a period that it's never been easier to start a startup than before. So it's important to say the flip side of this is that everyone can start a startup. So now you have a lot more competition, which is also something that we have to take into account. A little bit about why you do not want investors. Um, First of all, raising money is a full-time job and gets you out of focus. So that's why I said this is something that is very important for you to understand. Are you going for investors or not? Because if you are going for investors, the only way to do it is at least isolate one co-founder to be full-time on an investor search. It totally gets you out of focus on the product, for example. So that's something to think about. Chances are against you, especially in 2023. Chances are really against you that you're going to get investors, especially if you don't know the right people already to start with. Important to say, if you don't know your investors before you start raising money, you will probably not be successful. Most of the people that raise are already connected to people that can invest. The cold calling approach on investors rarely works. Other disadvantages, you're no longer your own boss. You have to report, you have to the decision making. They're gonna be there in the decision maker. It's good sometimes if you have a very, very smart investor that can help you, you're extremely lucky. In some cases, it can be a freaking nightmare. They can be really not fun to deal with. In some cases, you can get fired. The VCs are always firing people if they feel like you're no longer the CEO or co-founder that they need. Another reason is that investors will always push you towards liquidity. So let's say the example I gave you before about this person that created a beautiful lifestyle business that generates 70K of profit a month. For investors, it's a joke. Investors will tell you, look, you took our money under the assumption that you're building a global company. So ethically, you can't stop. You have to go full speed and maybe burn in the way, in a way. So that's something that you have to think about. They will not let you stop. And honestly, if you're ethical with them, you would not stop. They're basically there to invest in about 30 companies and have two of them or one of them returning the entire portfolio. And if you have a chance to be this one, you can never stop on something that seems good for you. You have to keep on pushing full speed. As we mentioned before, if you delay investment, it means higher valuation and better terms. So there are many, many reasons to bootstrap if you can. I see that we have maybe a QA question, so let me see if I can help on one of them. If I can't, I'm not gonna. So Folk is saying, as financiers basically prefer wealth management over investing. If one must survive by themselves, why hope or try? Yes, I am a great believer of taking our destiny in our own hands, and that's what bootstrapping is. Bootstrapping is basically, I want full control, the freedom, and also the moral freedom of not feeling like I cheated someone or say I owe something to someone, and so on and so on. That's the beauty. That's basically the beauty of bootstrapping. So that's good. Excellent. A little bit about just to tell you a little bit, just an example of what I could have done because I would bootstrap. I have started traveling the world in 2010 as a digital nomad and built this entire operation of StartupBlink um, while living in 80 countries. And that's something that I have a blog about this, by the way, at becomenomad.com if you're interested in the topic about how to do it and so on. But the idea is that if I would have investors, it would be incredibly difficult to do it because they would expect me to stay where I am and to just focus and so on. By bootstrapping, you have no moral obligation to anyone but yourself, which is pretty cool. So something to maybe think about. Now, how do you bootstrap? So we already agreed, or I already told you that, look, if you want to build a startup, it's going to cost you money and time. There is no way around it at all. So, and you also have to understand a startup takes a lot of time until it becomes profitable. There is a saying that basically there is a 1,000 days principle. That's from the TMBA podcast that basically says, even if you don't build a startup, even if you build an agency or something, it's going to take you 1,000 days to even reach the level of income that you had before you started. On startups, it's even more, especially on bootstrap startups. It's going to take you a lot more. It can take you even 5 years and so on, or 6 and 7 years. So the idea is that something has to subsidize our startups as we are building it. And the advice that I have for fellow entrepreneurs over here is if you are going for bootstrapping, make sure that you have something to subsidize. And you have to build this layer first. Um, Let me tell you a little bit about my subsidy model. So basically, I had initial savings from work. This could also be the subsidy, your own savings. I did a lot of freelancing while I was building StartupBlink. I was providing business plans and a lot of other services. And then basically slowly I transitioned into StartupBlink. But the idea is that it was always something that allowed StartupBlink to take money from because it needed to be subsidized. That's something that should be considered. So it's something that might be interesting. How can you do it? How can you build this subsidy model? With what? So first of all, you can fund it from your own savings. If you've worked for 10 years and you have a lot of savings, your subsidy can be your savings. It's a bit scary, might not be recommended, but it's a source. Another source is to get a loan. I recommend very to be careful about the loan. It means that you don't have the money yourself. The statistics are 90% against you, that your startup is going to be alive in 5 years. Be careful about getting a loan. We're going to talk a little bit about this. Another thing that I do recommend is actually to get a grant. A lot of the governments that we work with are giving massive grants, R&D grants, inclusivity grants, whatever it is. Just be careful not to get too addicted to grants because you have to work on your product and your market. And a lot of people make grants their business model, not a smart thing to do, but grants are relatively interesting. Another thing you can do is use crowdfunding, all those platforms like Indiegogo and Kickstarter and so on. Not amazing, wouldn't necessarily save you, but at least you can validate if there is interest in what you do. Another thing would be to join an accelerator to get you started a little bit, to give you the education. And, and basically, the most important thing would be to start selling from day one of your operation. This would be the best case scenario. There's basically selling means that you're making your clients your investors. That's the beauty of selling. You're basically making your clients your investors, and that's something that's pretty interesting, I guess, at some capacity. This chart tells us the truth about funding sources because everyone's talking about venture capital, blah blah, and this is the best way, and the unicorns and whatever. When you look at the total picture of how people are funding their startups, you would see the sad realization that this is basically number one, and this is personal savings and credit. The second thing would be friends and family money. Many people ridicule this and say friends, family, and fools, the free F, but this is a very big source because apparently professional investors are very reluctant to invest. Whoever is going to invest in you is probably going to be your family and friends. Be careful about this. We're going to talk a little bit about this. And then, only then, at 22 billion, you see the gaps over here. You have venture capital, angel investors, and so on. This is small. Crowdfunding is extremely small. So at the end of the day, this chart shows you that basically you have to rely on yourself. And maybe if you're going to go on the investment path, you have to also rely on your friends and family, which is scary, to be honest. But this is the sad realization. But the 185 billion, you understand who is coming from. It's coming from you. So just be prepared for that. That's the sad truth. A little bit about self-funding. I do think that if you believe in your startup, it makes some sense to basically use some of your savings to fund your startup. The reasons is that it creates self-commitment. You're in there. You put $10,000 of your own money. It's becoming serious. It's becoming emotional. So in a way, startups are so difficult that sometimes we need this a little bit of commitment. It also signals your commitment to co-founders and investors. If you go to an investor meeting and you tell them, hey, I need $10,000, and they tell you, what? Like, why didn't you invest it yourself? And you tell them, I don't want to take the risk. Nobody's going to invest in you. You have no faith in your own startup. So in a way, it sends a very strong signal to your investors. Also, if you invest your own money and you have a co-founder that joins later, probably you're going to have most of the equity. So just by investing a little bit, you create this edge of why you should have 60% of the company. And that's also interesting. And of course, it allows you to start right now instead of waiting for investors. You can start working on your product right now, which is interesting. So um, that's uh, that's a little bit of another reason. Um, yeah, Colin, I saw that you mentioned that you have another research that shows exactly the same pattern. I think it's really fascinating how people think VCs are the biggest source ever, and then you actually see, no, it's actually our money. Our bank accounts are funding our own innovation. It's pretty interesting in a way. So yeah, that's a sad thing. So some self-funding solutions. We talked a little bit about what I've done. I've been a consultant. There are a few platforms that allow you to basically uh, offer your services. Upwork, I've been a freelancer there for a long time. TopTal, Fiverr, a lot of them are allowing you to do it. And basically, uh, I'm always saying basically every startup, even if it's a product, has an angle of consulting in it. So maybe you can do consulting specifically on this angle. Another item to consider is loans and credit. Over here, a word of warning, you be careful with loans. What I would say is the following. If you have uncertainty about demand, which means that you're not even sure people are going to buy your product, don't take a loan. It's too risky. And if you are taking a loan, like I would much rather prefer to take a loan when you validated, you have sales, you sold about $20,000, and you say, Oof, I need to grow, I need this specific thing. But if you sold $100, don't take a loan. It doesn't make sense. You still need to prove to yourself that actually there is a pain that you're solving. And the second advice is that you make sure that you can repay the loan, even if your startup fails. You have 90% failure rate. Don't tell it to yourself because it's going to depress you. But when you take a loan, remember this stat, which means that in 90% chance, you're going to have to repay the loan by your own saving. Just make sure that if you take a loan, it's not something that is too crazy that later you can't, that it's going to really affect your quality of life. Make sure that it stays uh, logical, considering that there are 90% chance that you're going to pay it from your own money. That's important to say. The third thing is to cap your loss, which means that some people are losing 20,000, but they say, oh, you know what? I'm just putting 30,000 more. I'm guilty of this as well. Everyone's guilty of this, but you have to be strict because this, just like drug use, it can easily get out of control in a way. So you want to avoid a situation that it gets out of control. Grants. And we talked a little bit about grants. I'm just going to repeat the main points. You have a lot of beautiful grants out there of free money, no equity, and so on. What you want to check, but do know it's going to take a lot of time to apply. Governments and those bodies are very bureaucratic. So in essence, it's now time that you're not putting on your product and you're putting on the grant. It's okay, but take it into account. Some grants will give you conditions like you can only hire people from here and so on and so on. Be careful. Read the conditions very carefully because it might even block you from raising investment. Because if you're committed to only hiring people from one country, an investor goes in and sees this and says, or he or she says, no, I'm no longer interested. So be careful from the terms and conditions. And as we mentioned before, remember that your business model cannot be grants. Grants are here to get them and work on your product. They're not here to get them and then think about the next grant. And I've seen a lot of people that do it, and it kind of like reminds you of alcohol addiction in a way that you're now no longer sustainable and you're just looking for the next bottle. Grants are the same, and you cannot build a business model on grants unless you're writing the grants for clients, but not as a user. Let me see if there are any. No, that's cool. Cool. So another thing would be accelerators. I recommend accelerators. Accelerators are a great way. Some of them are not taking equity. If you're lucky enough to get an amazing accelerator like Y Combinator and you have big ambitions, don't think about it twice. There is no better jumping environment to achieving greatness. I will say that the best accelerators they're not interested in bootstrap startup. They are interested in startups that have the potential of becoming unicorns. And the best accelerators are, of course, YC above everyone else, and then maybe Techstars and I don't even know who else, corporate accelerators, but they will aim for big potential companies. If you're bootstrapping, maybe you shouldn't waste your time on accelerators because they will probably not take it. They want to understand how do you reach a valuation of $1 billion. And if you don't have this, then probably only the lower quality accelerators will accept you. Not sure you want to spend your time there instead of working on your product. But it is a good solution if you need the education, if you feel like you don't really know the theory. If I'm talking to you guys now and you feel, well, you know what, I understand half of it, but I don't understand half of the other concepts, maybe it's a good idea to go to an accelerator. They're also really good in connecting you with investors. But take into account that some accelerators suck. They're really bad accelerators. Not the smartest mentors, and some of them will also take equity from you and drive you crazy. I have a friend that actually was part of an accelerator once, raised a little bit of money, and regrets it to his last day because he basically says, just for them giving me like $10,000, now every time I do a deal with an investor or something like that, I have to ask for their approval. It's a pain. So be careful about allowing people to enter your cap table for such a small amount of money because it's can be very problematic. So that's cool. Um, okay, so crowdfunding. We talked a little bit about crowdfunding platform, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and so on. Interesting platforms, fun to play around with. I think it's mostly relevant not for the money, but mostly to understand if what you sell has is solving a real pain, has demand. And that's the biggest idea in crowdfunding. You you don't have to even build it, you just build the pitch for it about what you want to sell. And if the pitch is compelling enough, then people are going to fund it. And then you have a very good indication that you're onto something because someone is excited on a promise of getting something, which I think is pretty interesting. So there are a few advantages to that. The disadvantage is basically there isn't a lot of money involved there. Sometimes we commit to things, we don't understand their cost, and actually when you actually send it to people, it's going to be much more expensive than what you thought of. It's usually for physical products like hardware and IoT, and not so much for software products. So you have to also take this into account. So there are a few disadvantages. Now, one thing that is always easy to do is to reduce your life costs. This is something that I always recommend. Basically, your startup now is you. If you're bootstrapping, it's your revenue, your savings, and your expenses. So reducing your life cost makes a lot of sense. How do you reduce your life cost? Go live somewhere cheap. Let's say you go to a place like Chiang Mai or Medellin and so on and so on. You cut your cost of living if you're living in America, let's say by 70%, and you have more money to build your startup. And then again, you also have to prepare yourself for life-changing circumstances, especially if you have co-founders. Have a conversation. Like, do you want to get married soon? Do you want to have kids and so on? How much is your personal burn rate that you can survive without a paycheck, which is also very interesting. So you have to make sure that you realistically understand what is the level of, let's say, oxygen that you have in order to support your startup. And of course, say bye to your ego. When you are a startup founder, you can spend a lot less money. If you work for a corporate, you go for drinks with your friends and to dinners and so on. If you have a startup, that's the good times are over, at least in the first few years, and you have to prepare yourself that basically your ego is now not playing a role, and you're basically a little bit scrappy and frugal in everything that you do, and that's okay, but not it's not okay for everyone. Other than your life cost, you also have to reduce your business cost. So the idea over here is to leverage on other platforms. You don't need to invest. You don't need to reinvent absolutely everything. If you're doing a drone startup, you don't need to invent a platform to run your accounting. Use solutions out there like FreshBooks and so on. A lot of us are perfectionists and we would think that we would do it better. It's a big problem. Innovate only on one thing, not on multiple things that don't have to do with your business. Use freelancing platforms to hire. You have great people in India, in the Philippines, in Uganda, wherever you want. It makes sense to consider outsourcing to those places in order to build your startup in an economical way. I sometimes say that you should delay forming a legal entity, especially when you don't have revenue. Nobody cares about you when you don't have revenue. Maybe if you think I should open a company, an account, and whatever, make money first. Show yourself that you can actually, that you have something in your hands instead of investing in all those legal costs and then closing the company after you made $10 out of it. So Not a lot of people do it, but some people are getting stuck on this, and that's always a tragedy. And one of the biggest advice when you're doing bootstrapping is work Pareto on the 20% that generate the 80% of the value. There is a sentence that I think is very, very smart sentence. You are here to cross the swamp, not to fight all the alligators. Just cross the swamp. That's something that is important. I always find it difficult as well, but it's important. A little bit about the business model tactics for bootstrappers. Um, if you are bootstrapping, we talked a little bit about this before, build on what others are already selling with small tweaks and changes and so on, because you want to have a validated business model that works for someone, because if you don't, you're probably not going to be the first one managing to educate the market and to hit exactly what they need. You might, but you need investors for that. What you also want to do is to work on the MVP approach, develop a core feature list, minimum viable product, and see if someone cares. In many cases, you will get crickets. You will launch it, nobody would care about it, and then you know that you're probably in the wrong direction. In some cases, in the best case scenario, you will get a lot of complaints. What is this? This only has this functionality. Where is this functionality? This functionality. When you get those complaints, you will know you're onto something. So that's a good way to work in. Start selling in advance. Sometimes you can even pre-sale, especially if you're working with a corporate. You promise them something, you deliver on their money, which is always great. If you can build on an existing ecosystem, let's say a Facebook game, WordPress plugin, a Shopify plugin, makes some sense because you're basically connected to a platform that already exists. Of course, over there, you're also going to have the platform risk of them shutting you down, but at least you don't have to reinvent the wheel and you're entering an existing ecosystem. So in some cases, it makes sense. And always ask yourself, if you're not generating revenue, how can I start generating revenue next month? Usually it would be a hybrid between what you build and consulting. So that's something that is worth thinking about. Lots of the things that I tell you now are on the presentation for years, and I'm only starting to do them now. So it's easier said than done, but it's really smart stuff. So, but again, smart stuff is nice, but to convince ourselves to execute on smart stuff is difficult. And another thing that a bootstrap startup can do is to develop only for the local market. Global reach and so on can be very, very difficult, especially if you're not doing software. So by giving a product for the local market, might be a little bit easier in this case. So that's a little bit about that. I see that we lost the video. Just a second, I'll try to solve it. A minute. No, it's okay. Great. Okay, and while you are scaling, by the way, remember, you always have to pivot. You have to keep on pivoting and changing the business model according to what the market needs. Don't fall in love with your initial idea. Try to have as much recurring predictable revenue. And that's why the SaaS model, software as a service, is so popular. Monthly arrivals of payment, that's the most predictable way to make money. And raise prices. Always raise prices. This is the best advice. And we usually most people are underpricing, and raising prices is something that is very important once you have a functioning product. A little bit about soft skills for entrepreneurs. So basically, say yes. It will be fine. You will have a few opportunities when people are going to ask you, "Can you do that?" You have to say yes if you think that you can pull it off. But don't hesitate. There are a few moments in your startup life that people are going to arrive to you and tell you, "Can you do this project?" And it's important that you, if you feel like you can, that you're confident and you say yes. Don't be shy. You basically have to hustle. Tell about your startup to absolutely everyone. Many people are afraid about the idea or whatever. Crazy. Don't do that. Like share your startup. Be the evangelist of your startup. Share it. That's how you get interesting people to join you. You can find a story that gets you free traction. For example, the startup map or my digital nomad lifestyle that I told you. Something cool that gets a little bit of a story while you don't have a product that is a really good story, and keep grinding and take the dip, because the dip is basically a book by Seth Godin that basically tells us about you jump to a pool and you take the dip, and when you're down, you don't think about should I or shouldn't I, or maybe it was a mistake or whatever. You're actually staying for a while and seeing what's going on in this situation of uncertainty because startups have a lot of reason to close from day one. In a way, let's be honest, startups are dead businesses that are waiting to be born. It's not a business that was born. It's a dead business currently that is waiting to be born. And your job is to make sure that it's born. And so it's important to remember this. And it takes a lot of time. So that's something that is important. Other thing that might be recommended is we have only a few more minutes. I'm going to be a little bit fast. Is try to find product founder fit. Remember, we talked about product market fit, that basically you are solving a real pain that people are willing to pay for. Product founder fit is basically your ability to be the person that executes. So, for example, if you're building a mathematics startups or an algorithm AI startup, you better be a mathematician or someone that can do algorithms or someone that understands machine learning. If you are a mathematician that understands AI and machine learning, don't build a music startup unless it has to do with AI. So the idea is, remember, salaries are the biggest item of expense. So since you're the first team member, try building something that aligns with what you know to do. So that's important. Um, other than that, basically find a co-founder that you trust and you have past experience with. Working with a crap co-founder is a mess, you know. So there are many horror stories out there. And I was lucky enough to have great co-founders when I was building my businesses before, and really don't go on something that is before you really know a person. Try to have as much experience with them because it's tough times to build a startup, and you need someone that can be by your side. Um, if you are finding a co-founder, please don't find someone identical to you. That would really be not smart. Uh, Marketing people always like to co-found with marketing people. Salespeople would like to their co-found to be a salespeople. A coder would like because we always like to be with people that are just like us. But the idea is that you have to go out of your comfort zone and make sure that your co-founder, if you have a co-founder, is someone that can complement you and do something that you can't do. Because if you don't, you're gonna have to pay a person to do that. And that's important. And the other recommendation is to basically put time into writing good partnership agreements that covers issues like vesting, what happens if someone leaves, future equity events, and more. There is a saying, I think in Italian, clear agreement, good friendship. So if you have your best friends, don't dare to go on a startup with them without having a contract, because basically the contract defends both of you. When you don't agree on something, it's written down. It's crazy to put your friendship in risk and just say we're going to be okay, and then something happens, and then everyone has their own opinion. That's the beauty of a contract. It saves your friendship in a way. That's something that is important to say. Try not to work alone. What you build is a multiple of your network, and what you build, basically, that's going to be the final result. You need a strong network. Pick the right ecosystem. We talked about this. The right ecosystem is going to have so much, the right city, the right country, it's going to have so much influence on your startup. Go to events, local events, and so on. Talk to people. You have to talk to people. I'm telling you, once again, when I talk to startups about what was their best moment or the most important moment or top 10 moments, a lot of it was I met this person in the right time, randomly. That usually happens only in good ecosystems. Don't shut yourself from external feedback. This NDA mentality, stealth mentality, don't do it if you bootstrap. When you bootstrap, just talk with everyone. If someone can execute your startup better than you, let them do it. You shouldn't be doing it anywhere. They're going to save you time. So that's something to say. And I also want to tell you, people don't really like to steal ideas from other people because we all like to work on things that we came up with, even if it's totally stupid and makes no sense. So I've not seen a lot of people copying ideas from other people. It's just because we all think that we're smart. Imagine, oh wow, this is a great idea that this person have. I'm gonna do it. Not really. It doesn't really happen in reality. And surround yourself with fellow entrepreneurs. Go to co-working spaces, go to accelerators, go to meetups, go just make sure that you're not alone because startups are very difficult to build. So if you're on your own, it can get a little bit depressing. think this is the last slide. The last thing is basically kill it if it's time. Many of our startups, as I mentioned before, all startups are dead. They have to be born. If your startup is not born for so long, um, it's dead. You can just shut it down in a way. So it makes a lot of sense. It's very hard to know if your startup is a zombie. A zombie is basically someone that is dead but doesn't know that he's dead. Um, Here are a few questions. How to know if your startup is a zombie? You're very far from product market fit, which means that selling is very, very difficult. And if you close it, nobody would care. Nobody would say, wow, I'm really sad that this business closed. If you don't have it, you're a little bit far. It doesn't mean you have to close, but it's a good indication. There is no clear way of covering your costs and generating the revenue investment you need. People are not excited about it, and you're not excited about it. The fourth one is the most important thing, by the way. If you're not excited about your own startup, maybe it's time to start a new one. And that's basically it. Thank you for arriving. We're going to do more of those lectures for founders because in StartupBlink we work a lot with governments, and now we want to connect a little bit on startup-related topic. This is my email. If you have any questions, and yeah, we'll stay in touch. We'll send you an email with some of the things that we talked about. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for arriving, and hope to see you in our next sessions. Have a good one.